Russia's unrelenting bombing campaign in Ukraine has fueled skepticism about Moscow's pledge to scale back military operations in several areas. Debora Patta is in Kyiv with more on the devastation.
The Pentagon insists that they are not calling the Russian military's claim to pull back a retreat, but rather a repositioning. And it's unclear exactly what the Russians' intentions are, but around the capital, the threat remains high.
Boardroom negotiations mean little on the battlefield. Ukrainians are not letting their guard down. Soldiers patrol checkpoints around the capital, Kyiv, looking for the enemy within, searching for Russian saboteurs. Danger lurks on the ground and in the sky. When a drone flies overhead, this soldier raises his weapon. "I'm on it," he says, then takes aim. The enemy is still here, said President Volodymyr Zelensky. Missile and air attacks have not stopped. That's the reality. The port city of Mariupol has all but collapsed. Even if peace is given a chance, all that's left here is rubble and ruin. Kids want their childhood back. "I'm so tired," this little girl says, "and my toys have no batteries in them." Older men just want to forget. "What else can I do?" Gennady asks. "There's nothing left for me here." He's walking away after nearly 40 years working as a shoemaker here. Russian separatist fighters are in no mood for peace, forcing these Ukrainians to strip down, claiming they're searching for Nazi tattoos. In nearby Mykolaiv, a Russian rocket ripped through a government building, leaving a gaping hole and fresh trauma. This woman watched helplessly as her colleague died in her arms. Even if the Russian military makes good on its promise to pull back from Kyiv, around the capital where fierce battles have been raging, there's nothing much left to fight for. And while Ukraine claims to have taken back nearby towns like Irpin, those areas have been decimated. Many did not make it out alive.
British intelligence says Russian troops are pulling back from Kyiv to Belarus and Russia because they need to regroup after suffering heavy losses. And the Ukrainian government says they believe Russia will return some troops near Kyiv to keep the pressure on the capital and prevent Ukraine from sending its forces to the Eastern Front, where the war is still raging.
Thank you, Deborah. I'm curious about the situation on the ground. Russia said that they were going to be reducing operations there and in another nearby city, but it also looks like that, they were not having an easy go when it came to Kyiv, and so maybe they're kind of out of options. Have they reduced operations as far as you can see?
Well, the threat remains here, Anne-Marie. I mean, overnight we still heard air sirens and the occasional shelling. Just before I started talking to you, we were hearing one or two explosions here in the capital. Ukrainians are on their guard. And the claim by the Russian military really has yet to fully materialize on the ground. Ukrainians, in fact, on social media have responded with derision, believing it's a trick by Russian forces and that they're basically regrouping to come back even stronger. The military patrolled checkpoints, suspicious of anyone who could be a potential saboteur. And in Chernihiv, the other city that the Russians say they will reduce operations in, the governor of that region has said he sees no let-up in Russian attacks. President Volodymyr Zelensky said last night that the enemy is still here, that missile and air attacks continue. That, he said, is the reality. The Ukrainian government is very worried that the Russians are using this really as an opportunity to regroup. And they also believe that some troops will be left here to keep up the pressure on the capital. Remember, the war is still ongoing in the Eastern Front, in Donbass, and this is not a ceasefire. The Kremlin says it will concentrate on that region, which includes the decimated city of Mariupol. So the Ukrainian government is worried that Russian troops will keep this pressure on the capital so that they can't send their forces to Donbass and fight the war on that front. Anne-Marie?
And you bring up a great point. They were not able to take over the capital, Kyiv, and in some other areas, Ukrainian troops have actually been able to regain some of their positions, but not so when we're talking about the southern parts of Ukraine and Mariupol in particular. Can you just remind people about, what any of this means for those living in those parts of the country that are already overrun by Russian troops?
Well, essentially, Anne-Marie, it is hell on earth in Mariupol. There's always a big difference between negotiating tables and air-conditioned rooms and the battlefield. You've seen the images of places like Mariupol. It's apocalyptic. It's been decimated, reduced to rubble, reduced to ruins. Most people have fled, and those that remain have really been left with nothing. Time and again, we've spoken to people who fled the violence, and they've left with nothing but the clothes on their back. People are still fleeing that violence. Many are displaced and homeless. You know that more than half of Ukraine's children have already been displaced. Some of them have also suffered terrible injuries, and that's the kind of trauma that doesn't get resolved by peace talks, but leaves unbearable emotional scars. We've spoken to so many people who've lost everything. But what we also see here, Anne-Marie, is fierce resolve in this nation. Here in Kyiv, young people in underground bars turned bunkers are determined to support the country's soldiers, whether it's with food, with supplies, even homemade bombs like Molotov cocktails. Ordinary people who, in the face of devastating circumstances, refuse to be bowed.
And, while this is all happening, part of the negotiations includes the Donbass region, and Russia is still talking about liberating the Donbass region. But here's the thing. Where exactly is the Donbass region? Because it certainly seems like Russia's definition of it has been expanding throughout this invasion.
Well, at the moment, it's confined to the areas on the Eastern Front. You've seen cities like Mariupol, which would form part of that region. And yes, they say they're now going to focus on there, but you're right, it's been met with skepticism. The Pentagon has categorically stated that this is not a retreat, it's a repositioning. They're going to go in stronger. Russia has said before, they said they weren't going to invade Ukraine at one stage before the war started. So there is a lot of skepticism about what they say, what areas are confined to Donbass. And the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, said there is what Russia says and what Russia does. And that is what they are focusing on. And British intelligence has said that Russian forces, are now going back to Belarus and to Russia. So essentially that they can regroup, perhaps come back stronger. They have sustained very heavy losses in this area. So it's a wait and see approach. And it's really too early to say whether this will have any effect on the ground, whether they'll change their focus as they have promised to do. And if they do make good on this claim, well, then certainly it could be one of the most meaningful diplomatic moments in the peace talks. But so far, we haven't seen that. Anne-Marie?
Indeed. Debora, thank you very much.